Admiral Kethvar stood before the massive viewing screen on the bridge of the Eternal Dominion. His tall frame cast a shadow across the polished metal floor as dozens of Zephyrian officers worked at their stations. The bridge hummed with quiet efficiency, while holographic displays showed the positions of 200 warships spread across the dark void of space. The Zephyrian Empire had ruled this part of the galaxy for 800 years. Their ships were works of art and engineering that no other species could match. Each vessel was built with quantum crystalline hulls that could absorb massive amounts of damage. Their weapons fired concentrated antimatter that could melt through any known armor. Most impressive of all were their shields, which could bend space itself to deflect incoming attacks. Kethvar had commanded fleets for 40 years and had never lost a single battle. He had conquered the stubborn Kalari in the Vega system and crushed the rebellious mining colonies near Alpha Centauri. Every species that faced Zephyrian might either surrendered quickly or was wiped from existence. Today would be no different. Commander Vexthal approached with a data tablet in his 4-fingered hands. His silver skin gleamed under the bridge, lighting as he spoke in the musical tones of their language. The translation came through clearly on all communication channels so every officer could hear the briefing. The humans were coming with only 12 ships. Intelligence reports showed their largest vessel was barely 800 meters long. By comparison, the Eternal Dominion stretched over 2 kilometers from bow to stern and carried enough firepower to destroy small moons. The human fleet looked like toys compared to proper warships. Vexthal displayed images of the approaching human vessels on the main screen. The officers began laughing as soon as they saw them. The human ships appeared to be held together with simple welded joints that any civilized species had abandoned centuries ago. Their hulls showed obvious construction seams and patches where repairs had been made. Most shocking of all, the ships seemed to be built from basic metals and ceramics instead of advanced materials. Lieutenant Zarthek called out from his sensor station with obvious amusement in his voice. The energy readings from the human ships were pathetically low. Their power cores seemed to be simple fusion reactors that most species used for civilian transport vessels. Their weapons appeared to be primitive kinetic launchers and basic energy beams that could barely scratch modern armor plating. The younger officers started placing bets on how long the battle would last. Some predicted the humans would surrender as soon as they saw the Zephyrian fleet. Others thought it might take one demonstration shot to convince them to retreat. A few optimistic souls wagered that the humans might actually fire their weapons before giving up just to save face. Kethvar allowed the mood to remain light, but his tactical mind was already working through the engagement. The humans had chosen their position poorly near the asteroid fields of the Omega Centauri system. They would have nowhere to run when the shooting started. Their small numbers meant they could not even attempt to surround or outmaneuver the Zephyrian formation. The Admiral had fought dozens of species over his long career, and humans appeared to be among the least impressive. Their technology seemed centuries behind current galactic standards. Their ship designs showed no understanding of proper energy flow or structural engineering. Even their communication attempts used outdated frequency patterns that any first-year Academy student would recognize as inefficient. What puzzled Kethvar was why the humans had come at all. Any reasonable species would have seen the impossible odds and stayed home. Perhaps they were simply too young and inexperienced to understand what they faced. Many primitive civilizations made similar mistakes when they first encountered the Zephyrian Empire. The communications officer announced that the human fleet was requesting a meeting. This brought fresh laughter from the bridge crew. It was common for outmatched enemies to ask for negotiations when they realized their situation was hopeless. Kethvar had heard such requests many times before, and the result was always the same. He decided to grant the meeting request as a courtesy. It would give the humans one last chance to surrender with dignity before their ships were reduced to glowing debris. Perhaps they would even provide useful information about their home worlds and colonies that could be added to the Empire's expansion plans. The tactical display showed optimal firing solutions for every human vessel. The battle would be over in minutes once it began. The Eternal Dominion alone carried enough firepower to destroy the entire human fleet without assistance from the other ships. Adding 200 warships to the engagement was almost embarrassing overkill. Vexthal suggested they could use this encounter as a training exercise for junior officers. It would give them experience with targeting systems and battle coordination without any real danger. The human ships moved so slowly and predictably that hitting them would be easier than shooting at stationary targets during Academy practice sessions. Kethvar nodded his approval while studying the tactical readouts one final time. Everything looked exactly as expected. The humans were outgunned, outmanned, and outclassed in every possible way. Their ships were relics, their weapons were jokes, and their tactics were non-existent. This would be remembered as the shortest battle in Zephyrian military history. The Admiral straightened his ceremonial armor and prepared to address the human commander. He would offer them one chance to withdraw peacefully before demonstrating why the Zephyrian Empire had remained unchallenged for 8 centuries. After today, the galaxy would have one less species to worry about, and the Empire would gain access to whatever resources the human worlds might contain. Victory was certain, and the confidence of every officer on the bridge reflected that certainty. The human fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel with flashes of blue energy that looked primitive compared to Zephyrian jump technology. Admiral Kethvar watched from his command throne as the 12 human vessels took formation near the asteroid belt. Their movements were slow and clumsy like cargo haulers rather than military ships. Immediate sensor sweeps confirmed everything the intelligence reports had suggested. The human ships were even more pathetic up close than they had appeared in long-range scans. Their hulls were made of simple steel and titanium alloys that any modern weapon could punch through like paper. Obvious welding marks ran along the ship's sides where metal plates had been joined together by hand. Commander Vexthal shook his head in disbelief as he read the detailed analysis. The largest human vessel showed clear signs of battle damage that had been repaired with patches and replacement sections. Scorch marks along the hull suggested their own weapons had caused feedback damage during previous engagements. Most embarrassing of all, the ships appeared to be leaking small amounts of atmosphere from tiny hull breaches. The human flagship established communication using an outdated radio frequency that required the Zephyrian systems to step down to accommodate the primitive signal. When the connection stabilized, a middle-aged human male appeared on the main viewing screen. His hair was turning gray at the temples, and his face showed the weathered look of someone who had spent years in space. The human wore a simple blue uniform with minimal decorations and no obvious signs of high rank. His bridge looked like the interior of an industrial facility with exposed pipes and cable runs covering every surface. Control panels appeared to be built from basic electronic components that most civilized species had replaced with quantum processors decades ago. Captain Jake Morrison introduced himself in a calm voice that showed no trace of fear or concern. He spoke as if addressing an equal rather than a vastly superior military force. This casual attitude brought amused chuckles from several Zephyrian officers who could not believe the humans' ignorance of his situation. Admiral Kethvar decided to end this quickly and efficiently. He informed Captain Morrison that human vessels were trespassing in Zephyrian territory and must withdraw immediately. The Omega Centauri system belonged to the Empire by right of conquest, and no other species had any legal claim to the region. Morrison replied that his ships were conducting legitimate salvage operations on derelict vessels found in the asteroid field. He claimed that galactic law allowed such activities in unoccupied space and that humans had every right to be in the area. This response was so absurd that several bridge officers began laughing openly. The communication system carried the sounds of human bridge activity in the background. Officers could be heard calling out readings and status reports in their primitive language. Everything sounded casual and routine, as if the humans were conducting a normal patrol rather than facing annihilation by the galaxy's most powerful military force. Lieutenant Commander Lisa Park appeared beside Morrison on the communication screen. She was a young woman with short brown hair who seemed to be handling communications duties. Her uniform was identical to Morrison's, with no special insignia or decorations. She requested a brief delay to consult with Earth Command about the territorial dispute. Kethvar found this request amusing and granted the humans 5 minutes to contact their superiors. He expected them to return with orders to withdraw immediately. Once Earth Command learned about the massive Zephyrian fleet, no reasonable government would order 12 small ships to fight 200 state-of-the-art warships. During the communication delay, Zephyrian sensors continued their detailed analysis of the human vessels. The results became more ridiculous with each passing minute. Human weapons appeared to be simple chemical rockets and basic laser arrays with power outputs that would barely scratch Zephyrian shields. Their defensive systems consisted of crude, metal armor with no energy barriers or regenerative capabilities. The human ships showed no signs of advanced technology anywhere in their design. Their engines produced simple fusion exhaust rather than the exotic matter streams used by proper starships. Their communication arrays were basic radio transmitters that would be useless for long-range coordination. Even their life support systems appeared to rely on mechanical air circulation rather than environmental fields. Vexthal reported something strange from the sensor readings but dismissed it as equipment malfunction. There seemed to be unusual distortions in space behind the human fleet, but the readings were inconsistent and unclear. He ordered a technical team to recalibrate the sensor array to eliminate the false signals. Young officers on the bridge began making jokes about human engineering and technology. Some suggested the ships might fall apart on their own without any weapons fire. Others wondered if the humans were actually a primitive species that had stolen their ships from a more advanced civilization. Captain Morrison returned to the communication channel after exactly 5 minutes had passed. His expression remained calm and professional as he informed Admiral Kethavar that Earth Command had confirmed human rights to salvage operations in the region. He politely declined the withdrawal demand and suggested that both fleets could operate in the system without conflict. This response was so unexpected that the bridge fell silent for several seconds. No species had ever refused a direct order from the Zephyrian Empire when facing overwhelming military force. The sheer audacity of the human position was both shocking and insulting to officers who had never experienced defiance. Kethavar decided that immediate action was necessary to restore proper respect for Zephyrian authority. He informed Morrison that failure to comply with the withdrawal order would result in the destruction of all human vessels. The Empire did not negotiate with trespassers and would use whatever force was necessary to protect its territory. Morrison listened to the threat without any visible reaction. His bridge crew continued their normal activities as if facing the galaxy's most powerful military force was routine business. When Kethavar finished speaking, Morrison simply nodded and said he understood the Zephyrian position, but could not abandon legitimate operations based on unsupported territorial claims. The human captain suggested that both sides take a few minutes to reconsider their positions before taking any irreversible actions. He mentioned that additional human vessels might be arriving soon to support the salvage operations. This comment brought fresh laughter from the Zephyrian bridge crew, who could not imagine what difference a few more primitive ships would make. Admiral Kethavar decided to end the conversation and begin the attack. The humans had been given every opportunity to withdraw peacefully and had chosen to resist. Now they would learn why the Zephyrian Empire had remained unchallenged for 8 centuries of galactic dominance. Admiral Kethavar raised his hand to signal the weapons officer when something impossible began happening behind the human fleet. Space itself started to shimmer and bend like heat waves rising from hot metal. The distortion grew larger and more intense until it covered an area several kilometers wide. Commander Vexthal stared at his sensor displays in confusion as the readings became completely chaotic. Energy signatures spiked to levels that should have been impossible to generate or contain. Mass detectors registered something enormous, but the numbers kept changing as if the object was shifting between different states of matter. The bridge fell silent as every officer watched the main viewing screen. The shimmering distortion suddenly collapsed inward and vanished like a soap bubble bursting. What remained behind made every Zephyrian warrior feel terror for the first time in their military careers. The human battleship that materialized from the collapsing distortion field was larger than anything any of them had ever seen. At 15 kilometers long and 4 kilometers wide, it dwarfed the Eternal Dominion and made the rest of the Zephyrian fleet look like escort vessels. Its massive bulk blocked out the stars behind it and cast shadows across the asteroid field. The ship's hull was unlike anything in Zephyrian databases. It appeared to be made from some dark material that seemed to absorb sensor beams rather than reflect them. The surface had an organic quality that made it look more like a living creature than a constructed vessel. Strange patterns flowed across the hull like veins carrying luminous fluid through a giant body. Weapon ports lined the battleship's surface in perfect geometric arrays. Each opening was large enough to swallow a Zephyrian fighter craft whole. Gun turrets the size of buildings rotated slowly as they tracked targets across the enemy fleet. Whatever weapons they contained were completely hidden within the dark recesses of the hull. Lieutenant Zarthek called out readings from his sensor station, but his voice cracked with fear as he spoke. The human battleship's mass readings suggested it was built from materials denser than neutronium. Its power core generated more energy than the entire Zephyrian fleet combined. Most terrifying of all, the ship seemed to violate several fundamental laws of physics just by existing. The communication channel crackled as Captain Morrison's image returned to the main screen. His demeanor had not changed, but there was now something different in his eyes. The casual friendliness was still there, but underneath it was something cold and dangerous that made seasoned warriors uncomfortable. Morrison explained that the vessel was the USS Constitution, and that it served as one of humanity's diplomatic ships for situations requiring peaceful negotiations in contested space. He spoke about the 15-kilometer battleship as if it was a routine patrol craft rather than the most powerful weapon any of them had ever encountered. Commander Alex Turner appeared beside Morrison on the communication screen. He was a younger man with sandy brown hair who wore the same simple uniform as the rest of the human crew. Turner identified himself as the Constitution's weapons officer and began requesting targeting data from the other human ships in the fleet. The casual way Turner discussed targeting solutions sent chills through the Zephyrian bridge crew. He spoke about locking onto their ships the same way a technician might discuss routine maintenance procedures. There was no anger or excitement in his voice, just professional competence that was somehow more frightening than any threats could have been. Admiral Kethvar tried to contact his superiors, but the communication systems were experiencing interference from the human battleship. Every time the Constitution's weapons moved, the quantum field effects disrupted Zephyrian electronics. The ship seemed to bend space around itself in ways that made conventional technology unreliable. Vexthal attempted to analyze the battleship's capabilities, but the sensor readings made no sense. The weapons appeared to manipulate matter at the subatomic level using principles that Zephyrian science considered theoretical impossibilities. The power requirements alone should have torn the ship apart, yet it hung in space like a monument to human engineering superiority. The Constitution began moving with impossible grace for something so massive. It rotated slowly to bring its main weapon arrays to bear on the Zephyrian fleet. The movement was completely silent and seemed to defy the laws of momentum and inertia. Whatever technology allowed the ship to move also allowed it to ignore physics, as other species understood them. Captain Morrison continued speaking as if nothing unusual was happening. He mentioned that Earth had been studying galactic civilizations for many years before making official contact. Humanity had learned from the mistakes and limitations of other species and had developed technologies specifically designed to overcome those problems. The human captain suggested that both sides could still resolve their differences through peaceful discussion. He pointed out that the Constitution carried enough firepower to handle any conceivable threat, but that Earth preferred diplomatic solutions when possible. The casual way he discussed planet-killing weapons made it clear that humans considered such power to be routine. Dr. Sam Rodriguez joined the communication channel to provide additional context about human capabilities. He was an older man with gray hair who served as the fleet's science officer. Rodriguez explained that humanity had designed their ships to be effective against any known defensive technology in the galaxy. The doctor's calm academic tone made his words even more terrifying than direct threats would have been. He discussed antimatter weapons and quantum field manipulators the same way other species might talk about conventional explosives. Everything about human technology seemed to be several generations ahead of what anyone else had achieved. Admiral Kethvar realized that his fleet was completely outclassed and outgunned. 200 of the galaxy's most advanced warships suddenly seemed like primitive relics compared to the single human battleship. The confident certainty that had defined Zephyrian military doctrine for 8 centuries crumbled in the face of overwhelming human superiority. The Constitution completed its rotation and held position with its main weapons trained on the Zephyrian flagship. Energy readings spiked as the battleship's systems powered up to combat readiness. Whatever was about to happen would redefine the balance of power in the galaxy forever. Captain Morrison asked Admiral Kethvar if he would like to reconsider the withdrawal demand. The question was asked politely, but the 15-kilometer battleship floating behind him made it clear that refusal was no longer a reasonable option. The age of Zephyrian dominance was over, and the age of humanity had begun. Admiral Kethvar stared at the human battleship while his mind struggled to process what he was seeing. 8 centuries of Zephyrian military dominance had not prepared him for this moment. Every tactical doctrine and strategic principle his people had developed was useless against technology that seemed to ignore the basic laws of physics. Captain Morrison waited patiently for a response while the Constitution's weapon systems completed their targeting sequences. Energy readings continued climbing as the massive ship prepared to demonstrate capabilities that would redefine warfare throughout the galaxy. The casual way the humans handled such overwhelming power made their threat even more terrifying. Commander Vexthal attempted to establish communication with Zephyrian High Command, but the quantum interference from the human battleship was disrupting all long-range transmissions. The Constitution seemed to bend space around itself in ways that made conventional technology unreliable. Even their most advanced communication arrays were struggling to function properly. Lieutenant Zarthek called out new sensor readings that made no sense according to current scientific understanding. The human ship's power core was generating energy levels that should have been impossible to contain or control. Whatever technology humanity had developed was clearly several generations beyond anything other species had achieved. Morrison spoke again with the same calm professionalism he had shown throughout the encounter. He explained that the Constitution was prepared to provide a demonstration of human capabilities to help clarify the current situation. The way he discussed planet-killing weapons made it sound like a routine training exercise rather than a display of overwhelming force. Commander Turner reported that all targeting systems were ready and awaiting orders. His voice carried the same casual confidence that had characterized human communications throughout the encounter. The weapons officer spoke about locking onto targets the same way other people might discuss checking their messages or reviewing daily schedules. The Admiral realized he had to make a decision that would affect the future of the Zephyrian Empire. Retreat would mean admitting defeat without firing a shot and abandoning centuries of military tradition. Attack would mean the certain destruction of his entire fleet against an enemy they could not hope to match or even understand. Morrison selected a large asteroid floating nearby and designated it as the target for the demonstration. The rocky mass was roughly the size of a small moon and composed of dense metallic ores that would require enormous amounts of energy to destroy. Captain Morrison mentioned casually that this would be a minimal power display to avoid damaging any other ships in the area. The Constitution's main weapon array began to glow with energy that hurt to look at directly. The dark hull material seemed to come alive as power flowed through hidden conduits toward the firing ports. Strange harmonics filled the surrounding space as the battleship prepared to unleash forces that existed beyond the edge of known science. Beam of pure energy erupted from the Constitution's forward weapons array and struck the target asteroid with surgical precision. The effect was immediate and devastating. The rocky mass simply ceased to exist as matter was converted directly into energy at the quantum level. For a brief moment, the destruction created an artificial star that could be seen from light years away. The energy release was so intense that it temporarily overloaded every sensor system in the Zephyrian fleet. Automatic safety protocols shut down detection arrays to prevent permanent damage from the overwhelming radiation burst. When the systems came back online, the asteroid was completely gone without leaving any debris or trace elements behind. Shocked silence filled the bridge of the Eternal Dominion as officers tried to comprehend what they had witnessed. The most advanced Zephyrian weapons could destroy asteroids but required sustained bombardment over several minutes. The human ship had accomplished the same result instantly, with a single beam that manipulated matter itself. Commander Vexthal's hands shook as he read the energy analysis reports. The Constitution's weapon had generated more power in 1 second than the entire Zephyrian fleet could produce in a full day of continuous firing. Most terrifying of all the readings suggested this had been only a tiny fraction of the battleship's total capabilities. Captain Morrison asked Admiral Kethvar if the demonstration had been sufficient to clarify human intentions in the region. He mentioned that the Constitution carried enough ordnance to sterilize several star systems, and that Earth Command considered this particular vessel to be a minor patrol ship rather than a primary battle unit. Dr. Rodriguez provided additional, technical details that made the situation even more hopeless. He explained that humanity had been studying galactic warfare for decades before making contact and had specifically designed their weapons to counter every known defensive technology. Human ships were built to win rather than to look impressive or follow traditional design principles. The realization hit Kethvar like a physical blow. Humanity had been watching and learning while other species fought among themselves using outdated tactics and primitive weapons. They had entered the galactic stage only when they were certain of absolute superiority over any possible opposition. Lieutenant Zarthek managed to re-establish contact with Zephyrian High Command and immediately began transmitting all sensor data from the encounter. The response from headquarters was immediate disbelief, followed by demands for verification of the impossible readings. No one wanted to accept that their invincible military force had become obsolete overnight. Morrison offered the Zephyrian fleet a simple choice. They could withdraw immediately and report the encounter to their superiors, or they could remain in the area and experience a full demonstration of human firepower. He stressed that Earth preferred peaceful solutions, but was prepared to defend its interests using whatever force proved necessary. The human captain mentioned that several more Constitution-class battleships were stationed throughout human space, and that Earth maintained extensive defensive installations capable of protecting their territory from any conceivable threat. What the Zephyrians were seeing represented only a tiny sample of humanity's true military capabilities. Commander Turner added that human doctrine emphasized overwhelming superiority rather than prolonged conflict. Earth had learned from studying other species that the most effective strategy was to appear so powerful that rational enemies would choose cooperation over destruction. The goal was to win wars before they started, rather than fight battles that could be avoided. Admiral Kethvar realized that his 800 years of military tradition had ended in a single moment. The Zephyrian Empire's expansion had been stopped by a species that treated planet-killing weapons like routine patrol equipment. Everything his people had built was now subject to human approval, and there was nothing they could do about it. The Admiral gave the order to withdraw from the system without firing a single shot. For the first time in Zephyrian history, a fleet commander was ordering retreat in the face of superior enemy forces. The age of Zephyrian dominance was over, and the age of human supremacy had begun with a demonstration that would be remembered throughout the galaxy. The Zephyrian fleet began its withdrawal from the Omega Centauri system, with engines running at maximum power. Admiral Kethvar sat in his command chair watching the tactical display as 200 warships fled from 12 human vessels and one impossibly powerful battleship. The shame of retreat burned in his chest, but survival demanded swallowing pride and accepting the new reality. News of the encounter spread across galactic communication networks within hours of the Zephyrian withdrawal. Automated monitoring stations had detected the massive energy discharge from the Constitution's demonstration shot and recorded readings that seemed impossible according to known physics. Every major civilization received detailed sensor data showing humanity's overwhelming technological superiority. Commander Vexthal submitted his preliminary report to Zephyrian High Command, while the fleet continued its journey back to Imperial space. The document contained sensor readings and tactical analysis that would fundamentally change how every species viewed human capabilities. What had appeared to be a primitive civilization using crude technology was revealed as the galaxy's newest and most powerful military force. The political earthquake began immediately as species throughout the galaxy realized that the balance of power had shifted overnight. Trade delegations that had ignored human diplomatic overtures suddenly requested immediate meetings with Earth representatives. Defense alliances that had seemed permanent began dissolving as member civilizations reconsidered their military commitments. Captain Morrison filed his mission report with Earth Command using standard diplomatic language that made the encounter sound routine. He noted that territorial disputes had been resolved through peaceful negotiation, and that neighboring species had acknowledged human rights to conduct operations in the region. The report made no mention of weapons demonstrations or military threats. Lieutenant Commander Park handled the flood of incoming communication requests from species across the galaxy. Every major government wanted to establish formal diplomatic relations with humanity after learning about the Constitution's capabilities. Some offered trade agreements, while others requested mutual defense pacts that would place them under human protection. Admiral Kethvar faced the most difficult decision of his military career as his fleet approached Zephyrian space. Military tradition demanded that defeated commanders accept responsibility for their failures. He had led the galaxy's most powerful fleet into what should have been an easy victory, only to retreat without firing a shot against vastly inferior numbers. The Zephyrian High Command convened an emergency session to review the encounter and plan their response to humanity's emergence as a galactic power. Intelligence analysts studied every detail of the sensor readings, while military strategists attempted to develop tactics that might prove effective against human technology. The efforts were futile since humanity clearly possessed capabilities that made conventional warfare obsolete. Captain Morrison received orders from Earth Command to expand patrol operations throughout human-claimed territory. Additional Constitution. Class battleships would begin regular missions to ensure continued peaceful relations with neighboring species. The human doctrine of overwhelming deterrence was working exactly as planned by eliminating potential conflicts before they could develop. Dr. Rodriguez began compiling detailed reports on galactic military capabilities for transmission to Earth's strategic planning departments. His analysis confirmed that no known species possessed technology that could threaten human interests. The decades of careful study and preparation had given humanity decisive advantages that would take other civilizations centuries to match. Commander. Turner supervised the Constitution's return to patrol configuration as weapon systems powered down to standby levels. The massive battleship resumed its journey through human space while monitoring communication channels for any signs of hostile activity. The demonstration at Omega Centauri had achieved its purpose by establishing human dominance without requiring actual combat. On Earth, Fleet Admiral Kate Sullivan reviewed situation reports from across human-controlled space. Similar encounters were occurring wherever human ships met other species, as the galaxy learned that humanity had emerged as the dominant military force. Every confrontation ended the same way, with opposing fleets withdrawing rather than face impossible odds against superior technology. The Zephyrian Empire began a comprehensive review of its expansion policies, while intelligence services desperately attempted to gather more information about human capabilities. Spy networks that had operated successfully for centuries found themselves unable to penetrate human security or gather useful technical data. Humanity had prepared for galactic contact by developing counterintelligence systems that made their technology impossible to steal or copy. Admiral Kethvar submitted his resignation knowing that his military career was over. The officer who had never lost a battle would be remembered as the commander who lost an entire war without fighting. His retreat from Omega Centauri marked the end of Zephyrian military dominance and the beginning of a new era where human approval would be required for any major military action. Species throughout the galaxy began adjusting their foreign policies to accommodate the new reality of human supremacy. Territorial disputes that had raged for decades were suddenly resolved through negotiation, as civilizations realized that human intervention could settle any conflict instantly. Trade routes were reorganized to pass through human-controlled space, where merchant vessels enjoyed complete protection from pirates and raiders. The Constitution continued its patrol mission, while Earth Command evaluated the success of their strategy. Humanity had achieved galactic dominance through careful planning and overwhelming technological superiority rather than prolonged warfare. The doctrine of appearing so powerful that rational enemies would choose cooperation over destruction had proven completely effective. Secret facilities throughout human space continued developing even more advanced weapons and defensive systems. The Constitution-class battleships represented current technology rather than humanity's maximum capabilities. Earth maintained research programs that would ensure human military superiority for generations to come, regardless of what other species might develop. Communication requests continued flooding human diplomatic channels as every civilization sought to establish friendly relations with the galaxy's new dominant power. Earth Command responded selectively, accepting some offers while ignoring others based on strategic considerations that no other species fully understood. Humanity would shape the galaxy's future according to their own plans and priorities. The age of human dominance had begun not with conquest and destruction, but with a single demonstration that no rational enemy could ignore. Captain Morrison's mission to Omega Centauri would be studied by military academies throughout the galaxy as an example of how overwhelming superiority could achieve victory without firing a shot in anger. The galaxy had learned that humanity preferred peace but was prepared for war using weapons that made resistance futile.